Long before modern psychology, neuroscience, or self-help books existed, ancient civilizations across the world reached the same conclusion. The greatest power a human could develop was not physical dominance, wealth, or status, but mastery over their inner world. Kings, philosophers, warriors, and mystics all understood something most people today are only beginning to rediscover. If you cannot control your emotions, you will always be controlled by life. Ancient wisdom did not see emotions as something to be eliminated or suppressed. It saw them as forces of nature within the human being, forces that could either rule you or serve you, depending on your awareness. The ancients observed that people were rarely destroyed by external events. They were destroyed by their reactions to those events. This observation changed everything. In ancient texts, emotion was described as fire, water, wind, or energy. Powerful, necessary, and dangerous when left unmanaged. Fire can warm a home or burn it down. Water can nourish life or cause floods. Emotion was no different. It was never labeled as weakness. Lack of mastery was. The ancient secret to emotional control was not repression. It was understanding. They understood that emotions arise automatically, but reactions are choices. This distinction was the foundation of inner power. When you confuse emotion with action, you lose control. When you separate the two, you gain freedom. Ancient teachers noticed that the human mind is easily hijacked by emotion. Fear narrows perception. Anger distorts judgment. Desire blinds reason. Pride resists truth. When emotion takes the lead, intelligence follows blindly. This is why ancient wisdom emphasized stillness before action. Stillness was not passivity. It was preparation. The ancients trained their minds to pause before reacting. They believed that between stimulus and response lived a sacred space. In that space, a person could choose dignity, wisdom, and strength instead of impulse. This pause was the birthplace of inner power. Modern life conditions people to react instantly. Messages, demands, and expectations arrive without pause. Speed is rewarded. Reaction is praised. But ancient wisdom knew that speed without awareness creates chaos. True strength moves slowly and deliberately. Ancient warriors trained emotional control before physical skill. They understood that fear in battle killed more people than weapons. A calm warrior saw clearly. A reactive warrior made fatal mistakes. Emotional mastery was survival. Philosophers taught that suffering did not come from events, but from attachment and resistance. When you cling to outcomes or resist reality, emotions become storms. When you accept reality, emotions pass like weather. This acceptance was not weakness. It was power over the self. The ancients also understood that emotions are contagious. One unregulated person could destabilize an entire group. Leaders were trained to regulate their inner state so others could remain steady around them. Calm was leadership. Inner power was measured not by how loudly someone spoke or how forcefully they acted, but by how little external chaos disturbed their inner equilibrium. A person who remained calm under pressure was considered formidable. Ancient wisdom also recognized that uncontrolled emotion drains life force. Rage exhausts. Anxiety weakens. Envy poisons. Over time, emotional chaos erodes health, clarity, and purpose. Emotional control preserved energy. Energy was life. This is why ancient practices emphasized breath posture, silence, and observation. These were not spiritual rituals detached from reality. They were tools for nervous system regulation long before the nervous system was named. Breath was understood as the bridge between body and mind. Slow breath calmed emotion. Calm emotion sharpened perception. Sharpened perception increased power. This was a practical system, not philosophy alone. The ancients also understood that emotional control created freedom. When you are ruled by emotion, you are predictable. Others can manipulate you, trigger you, and steer you. When you master emotion, you become unpredictable and autonomous. Freedom was internal first. They also taught that inner power grows through awareness, not dominance. Trying to overpower emotion creates inner conflict. Awareness dissolves it. When you observe emotion without judgment, it loses intensity. What is seen clearly no longer controls you. Ancient wisdom emphasized knowing oneself. Self-knowledge was considered the highest form of knowledge. To know your emotional patterns was to know your vulnerabilities. To know your vulnerabilities was to protect your freedom. They warned against confusing emotional numbness with strength. Suppression was seen as dangerous. Suppressed emotion returned stronger and distorted. Mastery meant allowing emotion to exist without letting it dictate behavior. This is a subtle but critical difference. The ancients also recognized that emotional control creates moral clarity. When emotion dominates, ethics collapse. People justify cruelty, betrayal, and harm when ruled by anger, fear, or desire. Emotional mastery allowed integrity to remain intact under pressure. Inner power was inseparable from virtue. Ancient wisdom taught that life would always contain loss, uncertainty, and pain. Seeking a life without emotional discomfort was unrealistic. Seeking mastery over response was achievable. This shift removed fear of life itself. They understood that calm does not mean absence of emotion. It means presence with emotion. A calm person still feels deeply, but is not overwhelmed. Depth without chaos was the goal. This is why ancient teachers often appeared unshaken by circumstances that terrified others. They were not immune to emotion. They were trained. They trained awareness daily. They trained attention daily. They trained restraint daily. Inner power was not accidental. It was cultivated. In ancient cultures, emotional control was passed down as wisdom, not as self-help. It was considered essential for leadership, family, harmony, and survival. A reactive person was seen as dangerous not just to themselves, but to others. This perspective has largely been lost. Modern culture often celebrates emotional expression without regulation. Expression without mastery creates instability. Ancient wisdom balanced expression with control. The feeling was allowed. Reaction was disciplined. The ancient secret was simple but demanding. You cannot control what arises, but you can control what you reinforce. What you reinforce becomes habit. What becomes habit becomes character. Character shapes destiny. This is the chain they understood. Emotional control was not about becoming cold. It was about becoming unshakable. Inner power was not about domination. It was about sovereignty. As you reconnect with this ancient understanding, something begins to shift. You stop seeing emotion as the enemy. You stop seeing control as suppression. You begin to see mastery as partnership with your inner world. In the next part, you will learn how ancient wisdom viewed emotion as energy, not weakness, and how this shift alone can change the way you experience every emotional state. This is where control becomes strength, and where inner power begins to awaken. Ancient wisdom never viewed emotion as weakness. That idea is relatively modern and deeply misunderstood. To the ancients, emotion was energy. Powerful, moving, life-shaping energy that flowed through every human being. The problem was never emotion itself. The problem was unconscious emotion. Energy without direction becomes chaos. Energy with awareness becomes power. Modern culture often teaches people to either suppress emotion or express it without restraint. Both extremes weaken inner strength. Suppression turns emotion inward, where it festers and distorts. Uncontrolled expression releases emotion outward in destructive ways. Ancient wisdom offered a third path: awareness and direction. Emotion was understood as movement. The very word emotion comes from motion, meaning to move. Emotions move through the body and mind. When allowed to move consciously, they complete their cycle and dissolve. When blocked or indulged, they loop and intensify. This understanding changes everything. When you see emotion as energy, you stop judging it. Judgment creates resistance. Resistance traps energy. Trapped energy becomes anxiety, anger, resentment, or exhaustion. Awareness allows energy to flow. Flow restores balance. The ancients observed that every emotion carried information. Fear signaled potential threat. Anger signaled violated boundaries. Sadness signaled loss or change. Desire signaled attraction or purpose. None of these were considered bad. They were messages from the system. The danger arose when people confused the message with the action. Fear did not mean run blindly. Anger did not mean attack. Sadness did not mean collapse. Desire did not mean obsession. Emotional mastery meant receiving the message without surrendering control of behavior. This is why ancient teachings emphasized observation. Observation transforms energy. When you observe emotion rather than become it, the energy shifts. It loses its grip. Awareness acts like a lens, focusing raw emotion into usable power. Ancient practitioners noticed that emotion intensified when identified with identity. When someone said, "I am angry," instead of "I feel anger," the emotion became personal, permanent, and overwhelming. Identity fused with emotion created suffering. Separating identity from emotion was a core teaching. You are not anger. Anger is passing through you. You are not fear. Fear is a signal. This distinction allowed people to experience emotion fully, without being consumed by it. Emotion, as energy, also explained why suppressed emotion returned stronger. Energy does not disappear. It changes form. Suppressed anger becomes resentment. Suppressed fear becomes anxiety. Suppressed grief becomes numbness. Ancient wisdom warned that what you refuse to feel, you will eventually suffer. Feeling was not weakness. Avoidance was. The ancients also understood that emotion directly affected physical health. Long before modern medicine, they observed that chronic anger hardened the body, fear weakened vitality, and prolonged. Grief drained life force. Emotional regulation was health preservation. Energy that flows supports life. Energy that stagnates destroys it. This is why breath was central in ancient practices. Breath moved energy. Slow breath softened emotion. Shallow breath intensified it. Breath was the steering wheel of emotional energy. Posture mattered as well. A collapsed posture trapped energy. An upright, relaxed posture allowed circulation. The body was seen as the vessel through which emotional energy moved. The ancients also recognized emotional contagion. Emotion spreads from person to person through tone, posture, and presence. An unregulated individual could disrupt an entire group. A regulated individual could stabilize it. This made emotional mastery a social responsibility, not just a personal one. Leaders were trained to regulate emotion because their emotional state shaped others. Calm leaders created calm environments. Reactive leaders created chaos. Another key ancient insight was that emotional energy fuels thought. Thoughts do not arise in isolation. They are powered by emotion. When emotional energy is intense, thoughts multiply. When emotion settles, thoughts quiet. This explains why trying to control thoughts without addressing emotion fails. Ancient wisdom always worked with emotion first. They also understood that emotion seeks expression. If not expressed consciously, it will express itself unconsciously through behavior, illness, or self-sabotage. Conscious expression meant acknowledgement, movement, and release, not impulsive action. For example, anger could be acknowledged, felt, breathed through, and released without harming anyone. Fear could be acknowledged, respected, and integrated without panic. Sadness could be honored without collapse. This ability separated the wise from the reactive. Ancient teachings emphasized the middle path, neither repression nor indulgence. Awareness and restraint working together. This balance created inner stability. They also warned that labeling emotion as weakness made people vulnerable to manipulation. If you fear your emotions, others can exploit them. When you accept emotion as energy, you reclaim power. An emotionally literate person is difficult to control. The ancients also taught that emotional energy could be transformed. Anger could become determination. Fear could become caution. Sadness could become depth. Desire could become purpose. Transformation required awareness, not force. This was the true alchemy of inner power. They understood that emotion amplified intention. Emotion without intention was chaos. Intention without emotion was weak. Together they created impact. This is why ancient warriors cultivated calm intensity. Emotion was present, but directed. This made them precise, not reckless. Another ancient insight was that emotional energy rises in waves. It peaks and falls naturally if not interfered with. When people resisted the wave, they prolonged it. When they allowed it to rise and fall, it passed quickly. Timing mattered. The ancients trained patience during emotional peaks. They taught people not to act at the height of emotion. Waiting allowed energy to settle and clarity to return. They also recognized that emotions reveal attachment. Strong emotional reactions often pointed to where attachment existed. Attachment to outcome identity or control intensified suffering. Freedom came from loosening attachment, not from eliminating feeling. Emotion as energy also explained inner conflict. When different emotional energies pulled in different directions, the mind felt fragmented. Awareness unified these energies. Ancient practices such as meditation, contemplation, and stillness were designed to observe emotional energy without interference. Stillness was not emptiness. It was full awareness. In stillness, emotional energy revealed its patterns. Patterns once seen lost their power. This is why ancient wisdom emphasized knowing yourself. To know yourself was to know your emotional currents. To know your currents was to navigate life skillfully. They believed that inner power was not loud. It was steady. It did not force outcomes. It influenced them naturally. When emotional energy was regulated, presence deepened. Others felt it. Influence grew without effort. This understanding is still relevant today. Modern life triggers emotion constantly. Without mastery, people are exhausted, reactive, and distracted. Reclaiming the ancient view of emotion as energy restores balance, you stop fearing emotion. You stop fighting it. You learn to work with it. When you understand emotion as energy, you stop asking how do. I get rid of this feeling and start asking how do I move through it wisely. This question changes everything. In the next part, you will learn how the mind loses power through emotional reaction, and why reaction is the true source of inner weakness. This is where control becomes practical and inner power begins to feel real. The greatest loss of inner power does not come from hardship, failure, or external pressure. It comes from reaction. Ancient wisdom understood that the moment a person reacts emotionally without awareness, their mind is no longer leading. It is being led. Reaction hands control over to impulse, and impulse never acts in long-term favor. Reaction is fast, automatic, and unconscious. It feels justified in the moment and costly afterward. The ancients observed that most regret, shame, conflict, and suffering followed moments of unchecked reaction. Not because emotion was present, but because awareness was absent. Emotion itself is neutral energy. Reaction is what drains power. When an emotional trigger appears, the body responds first. Heart rate changes, muscles tighten, breath shortens. This happens before thought. If awareness is missing, the mind immediately follows the body's signal and begins justifying action. Words are spoken, decisions are made, and damage occurs before reflection arrives. This is how the mind loses authority. Ancient teachings emphasize that reaction collapses choice. When you react, there's no space between stimulus and response. No pause, no discernment, no wisdom. The mind becomes a servant to emotion instead of its guide. Power lives in the pause. The ancients believed that inner freedom existed only where reaction ended. A person who reacts automatically can be predicted, manipulated, and controlled. A person who responds consciously remains sovereign. Reaction narrows perception. In fear, you see threat everywhere. In anger, you see offense everywhere. In desire, you see opportunity everywhere. Emotional reaction filters reality through a single lens and hides alternatives. When perception narrows, intelligence shrinks. This is why reaction feels urgent but produces poor outcomes. Another way the mind loses power through reaction is through identity fusion. When someone reacts, they often defend identity rather than truth. Pride reacts to protect image. Shame reacts to hide vulnerability. Ego reacts to preserve status. Once identity is threatened, logic disappears. Ancient wisdom warned that ego-driven reaction was the fastest way to self-destruction. They taught that nothing external can steal your power unless you surrender it through reaction. Insults only wound if you react. Fear only paralyzes if you obey it. Manipulation only works if it triggers reaction. Reaction is consent. The ancients also noticed that reaction multiplies emotion. One reaction invites another. Anger triggers anger. Fear spreads fear. Reactivity escalates situations that could have remained neutral. Calm de-escalates. Reaction accelerates. This is why ancient leaders were trained to absorb pressure without reacting. Their stillness stabilized others. Their restraint prevented chaos. Reaction also drains energy. Emotional reactions consume enormous amounts of mental and physical resources. After reacting, people feel exhausted, depleted, and foggy. Energy that could have been used for clarity, creation, or strength is burned in moments of impulse. Power leaks through reaction. Another critical insight was that reaction creates suffering, not events. Two people can experience the same event and suffer differently based on reaction. One reacts and spirals. The other observes and adapts. The difference is not circumstance, but awareness. Ancient philosophers taught that reaction chains you to external conditions. If your peace depends on how others behave, you are not free. Reaction hands your inner state to the outside world. Freedom requires response, not reaction. Reaction also reinforces emotional patterns. Every time you react, you strengthen the neural pathway that produced that reaction. Over time, reaction becomes habit. Habit becomes character. Character becomes destiny. This is why ancient wisdom emphasized discipline at the level of response, not emotion. They did not attempt to eliminate anger, fear, or desire. They trained restraint. Restraint preserved power. Reaction also distorts memory. Emotional reactions rewrite how events are remembered. The mind remembers the emotional intensity, not the facts. This leads to distorted narratives, resentment, and prolonged suffering. Awareness preserves accuracy. Another way the mind loses power through reaction is through speech. Words spoken in reaction often carry emotional charge without clarity. Once spoken, they cannot be retrieved. Ancient teachings warned that speech was one of the most dangerous outlets of reaction. Silence was considered strength. They taught that reacting through speech weakened authority, while measured speech enhanced it. A calm voice carried more influence than a loud one. A pause spoke louder than an argument. Reaction also weakens intuition. Intuition requires stillness. When emotion is loud, intuition is drowned out. People who constantly react lose touch with inner guidance. Ancient mystics described intuition as a quiet signal only heard when the mind is calm. Reaction also damages relationships. Reactivity creates cycles of blame, defense, and escalation. Each reaction invites another. Awareness breaks cycles. One calm response can end an argument that could have lasted years. This is power in action. Another key ancient insight was that reaction creates attachment. When you react strongly, it reveals what you are attached to. Attachment to outcome approval, control, or identity fuels emotional volatility. They taught that observing reaction revealed inner chains. Reaction also prevents learning. When the mind reacts defensively, it cannot absorb feedback. Growth stops. Wisdom requires openness. This is why ancient students were trained to receive correction without reaction. Emotional restraint accelerated learning. Reaction also creates illusion of urgency. Everything feels immediate, critical, and personal. This urgency pushes people into mistakes. Ancient wisdom taught patience as a form of intelligence. Time reveals truth. Another way the mind loses power is by reacting to thoughts as if they are commands. Thoughts trigger emotion, emotion triggers reaction. Ancient wisdom taught that thoughts were not to be obeyed blindly. Thought required examination. Reaction to thought created suffering. They practiced witnessing thoughts without acting. This weakened mental tyranny. Reaction also locks people into past and future. Past reactions create regret. Future reactions create anxiety. Awareness anchors the mind in the present where power exists. The present moment is the only place where choice lives. Ancient wisdom also recognized that reaction often masquerades as strength. Anger feels powerful. Defensiveness feels assertive. Control feels decisive. But these are illusions. True strength is calm clarity under pressure. Calm is not weakness. It is mastery. Reaction also makes people manipulable. Anyone who can trigger you can control you. Ancient teachers warned that emotional buttons were vulnerabilities. Removing these buttons was liberation. This is why they trained equanimity. Reaction also feeds internal conflict. After reacting, the mind criticizes itself. Shame, guilt, and regret follow. This creates more emotional turbulence. Awareness prevents this cascade. Another ancient insight was that reaction is learned. Children model reactivity from adults. Cultures reinforce it. Reaction is not destiny. It is conditioning. What is conditioned can be unlearned. Ancient practices were designed to slow reaction time. Meditation, breathwork, contemplation, and restraint created space between impulse and action. In that space, power grew. Power was defined as the ability to choose response regardless of emotion. This is the core of inner mastery. When you stop reacting, you do not become passive. You become precise. You choose when to speak, when to act, and when to wait. This precision multiplies impact. Reaction wastes force. Response directs it. As you become aware of how reaction drains your power, something shifts. You begin to notice the moment before reaction. You feel the urge rise. You pause. In that pause, you reclaim authority. This is not suppression. It is sovereignty. In the next part, you will learn the hidden link between inner stillness and strength, and why stillness was considered the highest form of power in ancient wisdom. This is where reaction dissolves and true inner authority emerges. Ancient wisdom taught that the strongest person in any situation was not the loudest, the fastest, or the most forceful, but the one who could remain still inside. Inner stillness was never viewed as weakness or passivity. It was considered the source of all real strength. Stillness was not the absence of action. It was the absence of inner chaos. To the ancients, stillness meant the mind. It's no longer being dragged by emotion, impulse, or fear. When inner movement slowed, perception sharpened. When perception sharpened, action became precise. Precision created power. Most people associate strength with movement. They believe acting quickly, speaking decisively, and asserting dominance shows control. Ancient wisdom observed the opposite. Those who moved too quickly often acted blindly. Those who paused saw clearly. Stillness created vision. Inner stillness allowed the mind to gather itself. Thoughts no longer competed for attention. Emotion no longer hijacked focus. The mind became unified. A unified mind acts with far greater force than a scattered one. The ancients compared inner stillness to a calm body of water. When water is agitated, it reflects nothing clearly. When it becomes still, it reflects everything accurately. The mind functions the same way. Turbulence distorts reality. Stillness reveals it. This is why ancient teachers placed such emphasis on silence. Silence was not emptiness. It was presence without noise. In silence, the mind regained its natural clarity. They taught that inner stillness could exist even in action. A warrior could move while remaining still inside. A leader could speak while remaining inwardly calm. Stillness was internal, not external. This distinction was critical. Stillness did not require withdrawal from life. It required withdrawal from mental chaos. You could be fully engaged and inwardly steady at the same time. Ancient wisdom also recognized that. Inner stillness protected energy. Emotional turbulence drained life force. Calm conserved it. Energy saved through stillness could be used for focus, endurance, and resilience. This is why stillness was Associated with longevity, the ancients also understood that stillness made a person difficult to manipulate. Manipulation relies on triggering emotion. When inner stillness is present, triggers lose power. Without reaction, manipulation fails. Stillness created freedom. Another key insight was that stillness expanded time. When the mind is reactive, everything feels rushed. When the mind is still, time feels spacious. In spacious time, better decisions are made. This is why ancient leaders were known for patience. Stillness also allowed access to intuition. Intuition is subtle. It cannot be heard over mental noise. When the mind becomes quiet, intuition emerges naturally. Ancient mystics described intuition as a whisper that becomes audible only in silence. Stillness also strengthened moral clarity. When emotion quieted, values became clearer. Decisions aligned with principle rather than impulse. Integrity became easier. Strength without integrity was considered hollow. The ancients also noticed that stillness increased presence. Others could feel it. A still person grounded the space around them. This presence commanded respect without force. Presence was influence. Stillness also transformed fear. Fear thrives in mental noise. When the mind settles, fear loses momentum. Courage emerges not because fear disappears, because it no longer controls behavior. This is why stillness preceded courage. Ancient practices trained stillness daily, not to escape life, but to meet it more effectively. Meditation, contemplation, breath control, and mindful movement were tools to cultivate inner quiet. These practices slowed reaction time and expanded awareness. Another important ancient insight was that stillness revealed attachment. In stillness, desires, fears, and aversions surfaced clearly. What you could not sit with revealed where power was leaking. Stillness exposed truth. This truth allowed liberation. Stillness also balanced emotion. Emotion did not disappear. It flowed more smoothly. Peaks softened, valleys lifted. Emotional extremes reduced. Balance created resilience. The ancients taught that inner stillness was the foundation of authority. Authority was not dominance. It was self-possession. A person who possessed themselves could not be easily shaken. This is why stillness was associated with kingship and mastery. Stillness also prevented regret. Regret came from impulsive action. Stillness created reflection. Reflection guided wise action. Another powerful ancient teaching was that stillness could be practiced anywhere. It was not dependent on environment. Even in chaos, one could return inwardly. This internal refuge was considered priceless. Stillness also allowed emotional release. When the mind stopped interfering, emotions completed their cycle naturally. Suppression ended. Clarity followed. The ancients warned that chasing stimulation weakened stillness. Constant noise prevented inner quiet. Simplicity supported it. Simplicity was strength. Stillness also revealed the impermanent nature of emotion. In quiet awareness, emotions rose and fell on their own. This taught non-attachment. Non-attachment created peace. Ancient teachers emphasized that stillness was not something you achieved once. It was something you practiced daily. Each return to stillness strengthened it. Practice created mastery. Stillness also transformed suffering. Suffering decreased not because pain vanished, but because resistance ended. Acceptance softened experience. This acceptance was power. Stillness also allowed strategic action. When inner noise quieted, the right action became obvious. Effort decreased. Effectiveness increased. Ancient strategists valued stillness over aggression. Another insight was that inner stillness protected dignity. A still person did not lose themselves in emotion. Dignity remained intact even under pressure. Dignity was considered strength. Stillness also allowed learning. When reactive, the mind closed. When still, it absorbed. Growth accelerated. Ancient wisdom held that stillness was the gateway to all higher capacities. Clarity, intuition, strength, compassion, and wisdom all arose from inner quiet. Without stillness, power, fragmented as you begin to experience even moments of inner stillness, you notice something profound. Life does not need to slow down for you to feel calm. Calm comes from within. This is not withdrawal. It is grounding in the next part you. We'll learn how ancient wisdom practiced detachment without disconnection, and why true emotional control never required shutting down or becoming cold. This is where balance replaces suppression, and where inner power becomes sustainable. One of the most misunderstood ideas in ancient wisdom is detachment. Many people hear the word detachment and imagine coldness, distance, or emotional numbness. Ancient teachers meant none of these. Detachment was never about shutting down or withdrawing from life. It was about freeing yourself from inner captivity while remaining fully engaged with the world. Detachment without disconnection was considered one of the highest forms of emotional mastery. The ancients observed that suffering did not come from caring. It came from clinging. Caring allowed connection, joy, love, and meaning. Clinging created fear, anxiety, and control. Detachment meant releasing the grip, not abandoning the bond. You could care deeply without being controlled. This distinction is subtle, but powerful. A person who is attached reacts emotionally because their identity, safety, or worth feels threatened. A detached person feels the emotion fully, but does not lose balance. Emotion flows without dragging the mind with it. Ancient wisdom taught that attachment binds inner peace to external conditions. When peace depends on outcomes, people, or approval, it becomes fragile. Detachment returns peace to its rightful place inside. This did not mean indifference. Indifference was considered weakness. It meant the heart was closed. Detachment meant the heart was open, but not enslaved. A detached person could love without fear of loss, work without obsession, act without desperation. This created freedom. The ancients also understood that attachment amplified emotion. The more you cling, the stronger the emotional reaction when things change. Detachment softened emotional swings. Balance replaced extremes. This balance was not passive. It was steady. Ancient teachers used the metaphor of holding sand. If you grip tightly, it slips through your fingers. If you hold gently, it remains. Relationships, goals, and emotions behaved the same way. Detachment also protected clarity. When attachment is strong, perception distorts. You see what you want or fear rather than what is. Detachment restored accuracy. Accuracy is power. The ancients also warned that attachment made people manipulable. Anyone who controlled what you were attached to could control you. Detachment removed leverage. This was inner freedom. Detachment without disconnection also meant remaining emotionally available. You did not shut down to avoid pain. You accepted pain as part of life without letting it dominate behavior. Avoidance weakened resilience. Engagement strengthened it. Ancient wisdom emphasized that detachment was practiced internally, not externally. You could remain involved in family leadership, work, and love, while internally free. Freedom was a state of mind, not a change of circumstance. This is why detachment was taught to kings, warriors, and householders, not only monks. The ancients also understood that attachment was fueled by fear. Fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of rejection. When fear softened, attachment loosened. Detachment required trust. Trust in life, trust in self, and trust in the ability to adapt. Trust dissolved clinging. Another key insight was that detachment allowed faster emotional recovery. When something went wrong, a detached person felt disappointment, but returned to balance quickly. An attached person remained stuck, replaying and resisting. Recovery speed defined resilience. Detachment also reduced emotional exhaustion. Clinging consumed enormous energy. Letting go conserved it. Energy conserved became inner power. Ancient practices cultivated detachment through awareness. When you observe desire, fear, and aversion without obeying them, attachment weakened naturally. Awareness was the solvent. They also practiced gratitude. Gratitude allowed enjoyment without possession. You appreciated what was present without demanding permanence. Gratitude supported detachment. Another ancient method was acceptance of impermanence. Everything changed. Fighting this truth created suffering. Accepting it created peace. Impermanence was not a threat. It was reality. Detachment also improved relationships. When you stop trying to control others, relationships become lighter, healthier, and more honest. Love becomes choice, not fear. This is why ancient wisdom linked detachment to compassion. True compassion wanted freedom for both self and others. Detachment also meant releasing the need to be right. Attachment to being right fueled conflict. Detachment allowed listening. Listening built wisdom. Another important aspect was detachment from internal narratives. Stories about self, others, and life created emotional reactions. Detaching from these stories reduced suffering. Stories are powerful, but not always true. The ancients taught that detachment did not remove motivation. It refined it. You acted from purpose, not compulsion. Compulsion exhausted. Purpose energized. Detachment also allowed presence. When you stop clinging to future outcomes, you experience the present more fully. Presence deepened enjoyment. This is why detached individuals often appeared more alive, not less. Another key insight was that detachment created dignity. A detached person did not beg, chase, or react. Dignity remained intact regardless of circumstances. Dignity was strength. Ancient teachers emphasized that detachment was practiced gradually. You did not force yourself to stop caring. You gently loosened grip through awareness. Force created repression. Awareness created freedom. Detachment also prevented regret. When you acted without clinging, you accepted outcomes more easily. Acceptance ended mental loops. Another powerful effect was emotional clarity. Without attachment, emotions became clearer and more informative. You could feel anger without hatred, sadness without despair, love without fear. Emotion became guidance, not control. The ancients also taught that detachment allowed inner stillness to remain during action. You could act decisively without inner turmoil. This combination was mastery. Detachment without disconnection also protected joy. Joy experienced freely without fear of loss was purer. Fear diluted joy. Letting go enhanced pleasure. Another ancient teaching was that detachment aligned you with reality. Reality changed constantly. Detachment flowed with it. Resistance created suffering. Detachment also made people less reactive to praise and criticism. Approval did not inflate ego. Criticism did not crush spirit. Stability emerged. Ancient sages warned that detachment should never become avoidance. Avoidance numbed life. Detachment embraced life without chains. This balance was the secret. As you begin to practice detachment, something changes inside. You still care. You still feel. You still engage. But you are no longer controlled. You become steady in change. You become calm in uncertainty. You become free without becoming distant. In the next part, you will learn how ancient wisdom trained emotional control through awareness and why. Awareness was considered the most powerful discipline of all. This is where mastery becomes practical, and where inner power becomes lived experience. Asterisk. Ancient wisdom taught that emotional control was not achieved through force, discipline, or suppression, but through awareness. Awareness was considered the highest form of training because it worked with the mind rather than against it. Where force created inner conflict, awareness created harmony. Where control exhausted, awareness strengthened. The ancients understood that you cannot control what you are not aware of. Emotion arises before conscious thought. If awareness is absent, emotion takes the lead and reaction follows. If awareness is present, emotion is seen early and choice becomes possible. Awareness creates the pause. The pause creates power. Training emotional control through awareness begins with learning to notice emotion at its earliest stage. Most people only notice emotion once it has already taken over. Anger is noticed when words are spoken. Fear is noticed when avoidance begins. Anxiety is noticed when the body is already tense. Ancient training focused on catching emotion before it crossed that threshold. This required turning attention inward. Ancient practitioners were taught to observe subtle internal signals. A shift in breath, a tightening in the chest, a clenching of the jaw, a change in posture. These signals appeared before emotional reaction. Awareness of these signals allowed intervention before loss of control. The body was the first teacher. Emotion always manifests in the body before it dominates the mind. Awareness of bodily sensation became the foundation of emotional mastery. By noticing sensation without judgment, the practitioner stayed present while emotion unfolded. Judgment escalated emotion. Observation softened it. Ancient wisdom emphasized that awareness must be neutral. If awareness carried criticism or fear, it became another form of reaction. True awareness was calm, curious, and steady. It watched without interfering. This watching changed everything. When emotion was watched rather than resisted, its energy began to shift. The mind stopped feeding it with stories. The body stopped bracing against it. The emotion completed its cycle naturally. This is why awareness was considered self-regulating. The ancients also taught that awareness must be continuous, not occasional. Emotional control was not a technique used only in crisis. It was a way of living. Daily awareness strengthened the ability to remain centered under pressure. They practiced awareness in ordinary moments. While walking, eating, speaking, listening, and working, this built stability so that when emotional intensity arose, awareness was already present. Another key aspect of awareness training was separating sensation from interpretation. Sensation was real and immediate. Interpretation was mental narrative. Awareness stayed with sensation and delayed interpretation. This prevented escalation. For example, a racing heart was observed as sensation rather than interpreted as danger. Heat in the chest was noticed without labeling it as anger. This prevented the mind from amplifying emotion. Ancient teachers warned that naming emotion too quickly could solidify it. Sometimes simply feeling without labeling allowed emotion to dissolve faster. Awareness also involved noticing thoughts as objects rather than commands. Thoughts accompanied emotion, but did not require obedience. The practitioner learned to watch thoughts pass without acting on them. This weakened mental compulsion. Ancient wisdom emphasized that awareness revealed impermanence. When emotion was observed closely, it was seen to rise, peak, and fall. This understanding reduced fear of emotion. What passes cannot imprison. Fear of emotion was replaced with familiarity. Another important element of awareness training was breath awareness. Breath responded instantly to emotional shifts. By observing breath, the practitioner could track emotional intensity in real time. Slow breaths softened emotion. Awareness of breath anchored the mind in the present. Breath became an anchor. Posture awareness was also important. The ancients observed that posture reflected emotional state. Slumped posture reinforced sadness. Rigid posture reinforced anger. Relaxed upright posture supported calm. Awareness allowed adjustment. Awareness was practical. Another critical aspect was awareness of triggers. Triggers were not avoided, but studied. Each trigger revealed attachment, vulnerability, or unresolved emotion. Awareness turned triggers into teachers. Instead of asking, "Why am I reacting?" the practitioner asked, "What is being touched inside me?" This question shifted focus from blame to understanding. Ancient wisdom also emphasized awareness of language. Inner dialogue shaped emotional response. Harsh language intensified emotion. Gentle language soothed it. Awareness of self-talk allowed correction. Awareness also extended to awareness of environment. Noise crowds and overstimulation increased emotional volatility. Silence, order, and nature supported regulation. The ancients designed environments that supported calm. This was intentional. Another key insight was that awareness reduced identification. When you observe emotion, you are no longer merged with it. This separation restored agency. You could feel without becoming. This was liberation. Ancient teachers also trained awareness of desire and aversion. Desire pulled toward. aversion pushed away. Both disrupted balance. Awareness allowed desire and aversion to be felt without obeyed. Freedom lived here. Another aspect of awareness training was patience. Awareness did not rush emotion away. It stayed present until emotion passed. Impatience recreated resistance. Patience was strength. Ancient wisdom also emphasized compassion within awareness. Harsh observation triggered shame. Compassionate observation created safety. Safety allowed emotion to settle. Safety was essential. Awareness also revealed patterns. Patterns once seen lost power. Repeated reactions became predictable, and predictable reactions became manageable. Insight dissolved compulsion. Another important practice was awareness during speech. Before speaking, awareness checked tone, intention, and timing. This prevented regret and preserved dignity. Speech was considered action. Awareness also transformed conflict. In conflict, awareness allowed one to hear beyond words and see emotion beneath behavior. This prevented escalation. Understanding replaced reaction. Ancient wisdom taught that awareness expanded consciousness. The more awareness grew, the less emotion dominated. Perspective widened. Small issues lost intensity. Perspective was calming. Another key insight was that awareness itself was power. You did not need to change emotion. Seeing it clearly changed it. Awareness was alchemy. This is why ancient sages often appeared calm without effort. Their awareness was constant. Awareness also protected energy. Reaction wasted energy. Awareness conserved it. Conserved energy became clarity, resilience, and presence. Presence influenced others. Another important element was consistency. Awareness practiced daily reshaped the nervous system. Calm became baseline. Reactivity became occasional. This was training. Ancient teachers also warned that awareness was not analysis. Analysis stayed in the mind. Awareness stayed with direct experience. Confusing the two weakened results. Experience taught more than thought. Awareness also allowed forgiveness. When emotions were seen clearly, blame softened. Forgiveness restored peace. Peace strengthened power. Another insight was that awareness removed the need for suppression. When emotion was allowed consciously, suppression was unnecessary. Emotion resolved itself. Resolution ended struggle. As awareness deepened, inner control became effortless. The practitioner no longer tried to control emotion. Emotion aligned naturally. This was mastery. Emotional control, through awareness, was not about becoming unfeeling. It was about becoming unshaken. Feeling remained. Chaos disappeared. You still experienced joy, anger, fear, and sadness. But they no longer owned you. You owned yourself. In the next part, you will learn the power of response over reaction and how ancient wisdom turned awareness into deliberate action without emotional interference. This is where inner mastery expresses itself in the world, and where calm becomes strength in motion. Ancient wisdom taught that the greatest expression of emotional control was not silence, withdrawal, or restraint alone, but the ability to respond consciously instead of reacting automatically. Reaction was seen as instinct without awareness. Response was instinct, guided by intelligence. This distinction defined inner power in action. Reaction happens to you. Response comes from you. When you react, emotion decides the outcome. When you respond, awareness decides the direction. Ancient teachers believed this single shift separated those who were ruled by life from those who led themselves through it. Reaction is fast, loud, and urgent. It demands immediate release. Response is calm, deliberate, and precise. It waits just long enough to see clearly. That pause changes everything. In that pause, you reclaim authorship over your behavior. The ancients understood that reaction feels powerful but leaves you weak afterward. Response feels restrained but leaves you stronger. Reaction burns energy. Response directs it. This is why response was trained relentlessly. Ancient warriors were not trained to suppress fear. They were trained to respond to it. Fear sharpened awareness. Response guided action. This made them effective rather than reckless. In daily life, the same principle applies. When someone insults you, reaction seeks defense, retaliation, or withdrawal. Response evaluates intent, context, and consequence. Sometimes response is silence. Sometimes it is speech. Sometimes it is disengagement. The power lies in choice. Choice is strength. Ancient wisdom emphasized that response required clarity of values. Without values, response collapses into hesitation. With values, response becomes decisive. When you know what matters, emotion cannot. Hijack action. Values anchored response. The ancients also taught that response preserved dignity. Dignity was not pride. It was self-respect maintained under pressure. Reaction often sacrificed dignity for relief. Response protected it. They believed dignity was inner armor. Response also preserved relationships. Reaction escalated conflict. Response de-escalated it. One conscious response could prevent years of resentment. This was social intelligence. Ancient teachers observed that response slowed time. When you respond instead of react, you experience more time in the moment. You see more, hear more, and understand more. This expanded awareness improved outcomes. Time perception changed with presence. Response also required emotional literacy. You had to recognize what you were feeling without letting it drive behavior. Awareness created space. Space allowed response. This training made people resilient. Another ancient insight was that response transformed emotion. When you responded wisely to anger, anger lost its destructive edge. When you responded wisely to fear, fear became caution. Emotion evolved rather than exploded. Evolution was mastery. The ancients also noticed that response increased influence. People trusted those who responded calmly. They followed those who remained steady. Authority grew naturally. Influence did not require force. Response also reduced regret. Regret followed reaction. Response left little to undo. Even when outcomes were imperfect, inner peace remained intact. Peace was success. Ancient wisdom emphasized that response was a skill, not a trait. It was trained through repetition. Each moment of choosing response strengthened the ability to do it again. Training mattered. They practiced response in small moments. Waiting before speaking. Breathing before acting. Listening before replying. These small practices built capacity for larger challenges. Small victories built mastery. Another key insight was that response required humility. Reaction defended ego. Response served truth. Letting go of the need to win arguments or prove worth made response possible. Humility strengthened intelligence. The ancients also taught that response conserved energy. Emotional reaction drained vitality. Response preserved it. Preserved energy fueled clarity, creativity, and endurance. Energy was life force. Response also protected intuition. Intuition guided response. Reaction drowned intuition out. A calm mind heard inner guidance. Guidance improved action. Ancient teachers warned that response should not be confused with passivity. Response could be firm, decisive, and powerful. It simply was not impulsive. It acted with awareness rather than emotion. Strength without chaos. Response also created unpredictability. Reactive people were easy to read. Those who responded consciously could not be easily manipulated. Their behavior was not tied to triggers. Unpredictability protected freedom. Another ancient lesson was that response required patience with discomfort. The pause before response often felt uncomfortable. The urge to react demanded release. Enduring that discomfort was training. Discomfort was the gatekeeper of power. The ancients also recognized that response created internal alignment. Thought, emotion, and action moved together rather than against each other. This alignment reduced inner conflict. Harmony replaced tension. Response also elevated character. Over time, responses shaped who you became. Character was built in moments of choice, not moments of comfort. Destiny followed character. Ancient wisdom emphasized that response was an ethical act. It preserved integrity even under provocation. Integrity created self-trust. Self-trust stabilized the mind. Response also allowed learning. When you responded instead of reacted, you could reflect afterward without shame. Learning replaced regret. Growth accelerated. The ancients believed that the highest form of response was compassionate strength. Compassion did not excuse harmful behavior, but understood it. Strength enforced boundaries without hatred. This balance was mastery. Response also required awareness of timing. Knowing when to speak and when to wait amplified impact. Timing was strategic. Wisdom was timing. Another ancient insight was that response reduced suffering at its root. Suffering came from resistance and reaction. Response accepted reality and acted wisely within it. Acceptance powered action. They taught that response transformed adversity into training. Each challenge became an opportunity to strengthen inner control. Adversity built power. Response also made life quieter internally. Emotional storms passed more quickly. Mental noise decreased. Calm became familiar. Calm became home. Ancient teachers emphasized that response was not perfection. Everyone reacted sometimes. Mastery was measured by recovery speed, not absence of reaction. Recovery mattered. They also taught that response required forgiveness of self. Harsh self-judgment after reaction reinforced fear. Forgiveness restored balance. Balance sustained progress. Response also deepened presence. When you respond consciously, you are fully there. Presence enriched experience. Life felt fuller. Another key ancient lesson was that response aligned you with reality rather than fantasy. Reaction lived in imagined threats. Response dealt with what was actually happening. Reality grounded strength. As response became habit, inner power stabilized. External events lost their ability to shake you. You became the calm center rather than the spinning edge. You did not avoid emotion. You did not suppress feeling. You simply chose wisely. This is the power of response over reaction. In the next part, you will learn how ancient wisdom built inner power that could not be shaken by loss, success, praise, or pressure. This is where emotional control becomes identity, and where strength becomes unbreakable. The ancient path of emotional control and inner power does not end with knowledge. It ends with embodiment. Everything you have learned was never meant to stay as ideas in the mind. It was meant to become the way you move through the world quietly, steadily, and unshaken. Inner power is not something you activate only in moments of stress. It is a way of being that settles into you over time. It shows itself in how you wake up, how you listen, how you pause before speaking, and how you respond when life presses hard against you. It is visible not through force, but through presence. Living as the calm center does not mean life becomes calm. The world will remain unpredictable, loud, and demanding. People will still project emotions, pressure expectations, and fear. Circumstances will still shift without warning. The difference is that you are no longer pulled into every wave. You become the anchor. The ancient masters understood that chaos outside only becomes suffering when chaos enters within. When your inner state is stable, external disorder loses its power. You can move through noise without absorbing it. You can face conflict without becoming it. This is the true meaning of emotional control. You no longer try to eliminate emotion. You allow it to arise, move, and pass without surrendering direction. Emotion becomes information, not command. You feel fully without losing yourself. This balance is rare and powerful. Inner power now expresses itself through simplicity. You no longer need to prove strength, defend identity, or win every moment. You conserve energy by choosing what deserves your attention. What you do not engage with loses influence over you. This selectivity is not avoidance. It is intelligence. As you live this way, your reactions slow naturally. The pause between stimulus and response becomes familiar. In that pause, clarity lives. From that clarity, wise action emerges. You begin to trust this process because it works. Trust replaces tension. You also begin to notice that others respond differently to you. Calm presence alters dynamics. People feel steadier around you or reveal themselves more clearly. You are harder to manipulate not because you resist, but because there is nothing reactive to grip. This is quiet authority. Living as the calm center also means accepting impermanence fully. You no longer fight change. You adapt without panic. Loss is felt without collapse. Success is enjoyed without attachment. This emotional flexibility protects your inner balance. Balance becomes your baseline. You stop measuring power by outcomes alone. You measure it by alignment. Did you act with awareness? Did you preserve dignity? Did you remain true to your values? When these are intact, external results lose their ability to define you. This creates deep internal peace. Inner power also deepens compassion. When you are no longer battling your own emotions, you recognize the struggle in others. Compassion arises without weakness. Boundaries remain without hostility. You can be firm and kind at the same time. This is mastery. The ancient path never asked you to withdraw from life. It asked you to meet life without surrendering yourself. You still engage, still strive, still care, but you do so from steadiness rather than fear. Fear no longer drives you. You also begin to see that inner power is renewable. It is strengthened through daily awareness, honest reflection, rest, and restraint. When neglected, it fades. When honored, it grows. This is a living practice. You will still have moments of reaction. This does not mean failure. Mastery is not the absence of reaction, but the speed of return. Each time you notice regain balance and choose consciously, you reinforce your power. Recovery is strength. Over time, something fundamental shifts. You no longer seek control over life. You cultivate control over self. And in doing so, life becomes easier to navigate. The ancient secret was never hidden because it was complicated. It was hidden because it required responsibility. Responsibility for your inner world. Now that responsibility becomes freedom. You stand steady while others rush. You remain clear while others scatter. You choose while others react. This is not superiority. This is self-possession. You have not become cold. You have become grounded. You have not disconnected. You have become free. And from this place, your inner power is no longer something you seek. It is who you are.